Today on Exodus Brothers, we're joined by Lilia Tarawa, author, speaker, and former member of the Gloriavale Christian community in New Zealand, where she lived for the first 18 years of her life. As the granddaughter of the group's founder, she grew up at the center of a high-control religious system marked by strict gender roles, public shaming, and enforced obedience.
After witnessing abuse and coercion, including forced marriage arrangements, Lilia made the courageous decision to leave with her family. She later told her story in her memoir, Daughter of Gloriavale, and now works to educate others about psychological control, personal agency, and reclaiming identity after religious trauma. Lilia, welcome to the show.
Kia ora, everyone. As we say in New Zealand, hello. It's so great to be here, and I'm very excited for this conversation.
So glad to have you. Lilia, for listeners who may not know, what was daily life like growing up inside Gloriavale?
Yeah, so Gloriavale, what I might do is give you a bit of background into how Gloriavale actually started, because it's really important for people to understand. So my grandfather was an evangelical Christian pastor, and he was traveling in Australia, flying into the outback, evangelizing the word of God. And he was flying around with his very heavily pregnant wife at the time. And he was in a very severe plane crash, and the wings of the plane were completely ripped off and only the cabin survived.
Wow.
My grandmother at the time also survived the crash, and she was pregnant with my mother. And my grandfather, they were in the middle of the wilderness. He basically took them back to civilization, like literally made a raft out of tree trunks and ferried them down the river to civilization, saved his wife, who eventually had the baby, who was my mother. He was saved when he was very young, he tells us. And then this sort of kickstarted his campaign, and he was very indoctrinated with the evangelical beliefs of Billy Graham. And so he's always told us these amazing stories. And each of these amazing stories that he tells us of things that have happened were because of God. God had saved him. God had told him that he was meant to survive that plane crash. And they ultimately called my mother Miracle. So Miracle is my mother, and she's the daughter of the founder of Gloriavale. So my mother has 14 brothers and sisters, all sired by my grandfather, Neville Cooper, who later called himself Hopeful Christian. Now, he came over to New Zealand and because he was invited to preach at some of the churches here. He was incredibly charismatic and had a gift of the gab. People loved hearing him preach. He was going around doing baptisms. He was giving people practical ways to live their life. Like, this guy was just incredible for people who were feeling lost. And he was a very powerful man. What happened is eventually he had a falling out with the other leaders of the church where he had been invited to preach. And so there was essentially a congregation split. And this congregation split led to, out in Cust, just out of Otatahi, Christchurch in New Zealand, a small community forming. And in this community, people started to hold all things in common as they believed the gospel of Christ taught them to do. So they began to sell everything and pull all of their money into communal bank accounts. They built communal hostels, and each family was assigned a room to live in. So one family, one room. There was communal kitchens, so one massive big commercial kitchen to service everyone who lived on the compound. And there was big dining halls where everyone ate together. It was essentially like a massive big family. They started all their businesses together. So instead of people owning businesses individually, the church would own the businesses, and then the men would work in the businesses, and they didn't get paid for their time or their labor. All of that money just went straight back into the community and then was distributed as the leaders saw fit. What eventually happened is they outgrew this place in Cust, and my grandfather went looking for somewhere that they could expand and found a farm on the west coast of New Zealand's South Island. Now, the west coast is very, very isolated and nestled under Mount Brino Lynn by Lake Hauperi, there was a big farm for sale. So they purchased this farm and took all of their businesses over there and established what we now know today to be Gloriavale, which is a place where there's big hostels, people live in the same way, which I've explained, but there's children being born there that have no knowledge of anything but this way of life. And that was my life growing up. I was born into this place. It's all I knew from the moment I opened my eyes, and I wore a blue dress because there's all uniforms. So I wore a full-length blue dress because the teaching was that women should be covered. Full-length blue dress to my ankles, down to my wrists, up to my neck. I wore a white head covering as a symbol of my faith, as a symbol of my submission to God and man. And all of my friends and cousins and everyone that I grew up with wore the same dress. And the men wore blue pants, all in the same color, and light blue shirts. And we lived in this way. And that was all I knew for most of my life.
Wow. From an outsider perspective, it almost feels a little Amish adjacent.
Yeah, so my grandfather actually traveled to the States to study Amish way of living, Hutterites, Mennonites, very similar. He wanted something similar. They are all referred to as communal living. And so he was inspired by the outfits of the Amish when he designed because he was a very resourceful, creative man. He designed what these dresses would look like that all the women would wear and what the shirts would look like that all the men would wear. So it's very similar to Amish. The thing that is different though is, there is electricity and there is, like cameras. You're allowed to use cameras. You're allowed to use a lot of the technology of the world. The kicker though is that it is all heavily controlled. So when I say you're allowed to use technology, you're allowed to use the internet only for a particular task, and it is heavily controlled by the IT and the community. So, little bit like Amish, Mennonite, Hutterite.
Did this all feel very normal to you at the time? Like, did you ever question any of it, or did you just sort of feel like it was just normal life?
Yeah, so normal, so normal. This is all I'd known from a baby. So I knew nothing other than this way of life. So people often ask, what makes people join cults? And the thing is, I didn't join a cult. I was born into a cult, and it wasn't a cult for me. It was just a community of people loving God, living in the way Jesus wanted us to live. And this was the way of life that I knew nothing other than that.
What were you taught about obedience in the outside world as a child?
Obedience was first taught to me as obedience to your parents. Parents are obedient to the church. The church is obedient to God. So it's a very clear structure, hierarchy of how things work. Obedience meant complete and utter submission of my will to the church. It meant that if I had a question about something or I didn't agree with something, it didn't matter. My thoughts, my own feelings, my own beliefs didn't matter. What mattered was only what my parents told me. And what mattered to them was only what the church told them. And what mattered to the church was only what God told the church. And then God sent his voice down to the church and his teachings to the church through my grandfather, who was the church leader. So we called him the Star of God. And he used to say that he was held in the palm of God and that God sent messages through him. So when this man spoke as a believer in this church, it wasn't Neville Cooper or Hopeful Christian that was speaking. It was God speaking. So when God's speaking to you and he tells you to do something and you truly believe in this God, you do it. So just think about how much authority that affords the person.
Wow. So you always kind of viewed your grandfather that way? Was there any time you were questioning that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one around my grandfather because I loved my grandfather growing up. It's a bit of a complicated relationship, but I think it always is with people who sometimes struggle to understand this. And let me be clear, my grandfather is a convicted pedophile and he has been imprisoned for it. What happened after that, there was a big court case about it in New Zealand. What happened after that is he walked right back into the church. They accepted him back as the top leader and pastor of that church. And what was told to the church members is that he was persecuted for his faith. So I grew up believing that my grandfather was a hero and he was a martyr for the faith, and that he had been imprisoned because he loved God so much. And these were the stories that most of us in the community believed. And the only people who knew otherwise were either just held it in complete secrecy or buried it. It was only till I was quite a lot older that I was actually rummaging around some of my mother's drawers, and I found a news clipping. And this was the first I'd ever known that he had done these things and had these convictions against his name. So my parents knew and didn't tell me, and still believed that they should follow this person. And I think that's a really good example of the level of control that cult leaders have on their followers. Like, this man was venerated. We worshipped the ground he walked on. If he looked your way, you were so honored and pleased. He, for all purposes, was the God that we worshipped.
Wow.
And so somebody like that, they can do no wrong. I mean, if somebody is a convicted pedophile, what could he possibly do to lose favor in people's eyes?
I mean, it's a good question. I think for me, there were a few things, and one of them was really personal. So when I was very young, there was, and this story always sits with me. When I was very young, we used to go to school and get report cards. And I got a report card when I was 6 years old. And it said my teacher, who was a female, had written, "Lilia demonstrates leadership skills." And my mother thought this was going to be a good thing. So she's in my ear saying, "Oh my God, this is going to be amazing," because report cards are read out to the entire congregation at dinner time. That is one of the things that my grandfather used to do. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got an amazing report card. I'm a straight A student. I'm going to get basically a big pat on the back in front of everyone. And I'm 6 at this time. And what happens is he reads this out. He reads out the sentence that was written, "Lilia shows leadership skills." And then he says to the entire congregation, "We don't want women like you." And he's saying this to me in front of the entire congregation too. And I feel sick to my stomach. I feel like I'm going to throw up. I'm shaking at this point. Everyone is looking at me, and I just completely dissociate from my body. And I only know that there was a long period of time that he created a sermon on this, and he preached about the role of women in the church. Women are lower than men. Women are not to speak up. Women need to submit to their husband. We don't want stroppy women. We don't want women who think that they can do what they want. An entire sermon. And the only reason I know that it went for a really long time is because I was looking at the clock, because I needed one little thing to focus on to keep me tethered to reality. Dinner finishes up, and then we take our plates to the kitchen to scrape all the scraps and wash them through the dishwasher as we do. And my auntie comes to me and says, "Are you okay?" At this point, I think I'm just in shock. But I say, "Well, he must have been right. It must be my fault. There must be something wrong with what I've done." And so as I get older, though, this event stays with me and it doesn't go away, because I felt so embarrassed and so ashamed, and it makes me start to question things. And it was normal, I did internalize it as being, okay, well, this must be my fault. But also it was a really important event for me to experience, because it did make me question, why would this man be so mean to me, right? He's the top dog of the society I'm living in, but he's been so horrible to me in this instance. So there were things like that that really started to make me question leadership. but those questions are just kind of hidden in my mind. I truly feel that I had all of these questions and beliefs, and I put them in a safe place in my head and locked them away because there's no other way to survive in my world.
Yeah. That was like a form of self-gaslighting too, for you to blame yourself and say, well, it must be my fault. And you can see how that was like, a way to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, that's the way they control you in high control environments. It is, they police you to a point, but the point is you've been so gaslighted that you start to police yourself. So they don't have to control you anymore because you're doing it on their behalf.
Was this a lot of the messaging that a lot of the girls were getting there, just in general? Or were you just used as one example?
Yeah, I think I was used as an example because, one, I'm his granddaughter, so that, it's one of the highest positions in the church, and he's not going to let me get away with it. He's going to use me as an example. And it wasn't just about me. It was a message for every single other girl in the church. We were taught things about our body. So, and there are literally TV interviews of him saying that as soon as a girl bleeds, she's fit to be a mother. So I had my period, I think, at 10. In his view, at 10, I am fit to be a mother. And he would have married me to someone if the laws of the land didn't prevent him from doing so. So in New Zealand, you can only get married at 16 if you have the permission of your caregivers or your parents. So in Gloriavale, children do get married at 16. His own kids got married when they were 16, and they're arranged marriages. So this is the kind of messaging we're receiving about our bodies. Your body is for pleasure for a man. It's for having babies. Abortion is a sin. You are to be a wife who submits to her husband, who takes care of the home and raises her children, doesn't speak up, and is quiet and demure at all times with her eyes cast to the ground. And that is your role in life. There is nothing for you but that role.
Complete and utter submission, essentially.
Complete and utter subservience. So if you look at that and you go, well, these are the women that he was creating in that society, then you look at the role of men in that society. Men have a huge amount of power and control in their homes. In saying that, they also are submitted to the church group. So there is a church group of men called the servants and shepherds in Gloriavale. And then there is the leading shepherd, who was my grandfather, and then there's two other shepherds. It's almost just like a structure, like bishops and archbishops. So they call them the shepherd, the leading shepherd, and then there's two that support him, and then there's an entire group of shepherds and servants that support them. They're like the ones that run the show. And then you've got husbands in their homes, and then their wife submits to the husband, and then the children submits to the wife. So just a very clear, this is your role. If this is your gender, this is your role. If you're a child, this is your role. If you're a single person, this is your role. If you're a married person, this is your role. If you're a married woman, this is your role. So I grew up having a very clear, this is my role and this is the box I'm meant to fit in. And you don't get a choice about it.
What would happen if say, a woman or a young girl rejected that or didn't want to, outwardly said, I don't want to do that? Did that happen ever? Or was there any instance of that?
Yeah. So, there absolutely was. And it was called rebellion. Very typically conservative Christian, you're in rebellion. Satan has a hold of you. So what would happen is that that person would then be rebuked. So someone would come to them, it might be their mother or anyone else who felt they didn't like this behavior and had seen this happening, or they had heard them saying things, and they would rebuke them in the name of Christ. And we called each other sister and brother. So say if you and I were in this environment, I would call you Brother Micah, Brother Jake, and you would call me Sister Lilia. So you would go to that person and you would say, Sister Lilia, I have heard you saying these things. It's wicked. It's Satan. I don't believe that's what Christ wants for you. It's not how the church has laid out this role for you. I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ. Basically, get yourself back on track. If you're not back on track pretty quick, then you're reported. So you're reported to the servants and shepherds. So the servants and shepherds had a room that they would sit in and have their meetings. So you would be taken into this room and held in this room, often without food and water, for long, long, long periods of time. And they would basically just rip you apart psychologically. So you're evil. You're going to hell. You're a sinner. Let's remember that these are kids, right? You're not right with Christ. You're going to go to hell. Like basically every form of psychological torture and abuse you can think of, like it was happening. So kids would break in these situations. I repent. I've done evil. I've done wrong. I want to get my life right with Christ. So then they would have to stand up publicly in front of the entire congregation and apologize and ask for forgiveness. And this was basically the disciplinary process for anyone who was even questioning the way we lived or had done something that the leaders thought wasn't in line or wasn't right or was a sin.
So basically always public humiliation.
Yeah.
Was the tactic.
Always public humiliation being a tactic. Shame used a lot, like making people embarrassed. Children would be marched up in front of the dining tables, and there was a stage up the front, and they would be made to stand on the stage and face the curtains, and they would have to stand there and go without food. And that was their punishment for having disobeyed their parents. Or it could be the most minor thing. Maybe they were caught wearing sunglasses, or they had their sleeve shirts rolled up too high, or their pants were slung too low, or they said a word that was not like a swear word or something. So there's like so much control over every single aspect of our lives. So the way I was raised, sex was only for marriage and was only between a man and a woman, and you were not to have any sex before marriage. So you had marriages between virgins in Gloriavale, where I lived. So, and we were the messaging that we were taught about our bodies was that, like, if a man lusted after you, it was because you tempted him. So you were not to be a stumbling block to your brother. That was the languaging around it. So I was told if I took my cardigan, and bearing in mind I'm wearing a full-length blue dress, right? And they're not flattering. You can't see much. So full-length blue dress, headscarf, and if I take my cardigan and I tie it around my waist, then I am tempting a man because they have no control over themselves. So if men do things to you, whose fault is it? So I was also taught if I fell asleep on a couch, like because we had couches around in the big lounges. So if I was tired and just randomly fell to sleep, that was because I was out there wanting to tempt the men and wanting to like give myself to them. I'm like a 14-year-old girl at this point. This is all the messaging I'm being taught about my body. So when it comes to my body, it's a shameful thing. My body is shameful because it's a stumbling block to my brothers, and then it's my thing. It's my fault if anything happens to me. And so what happened when I came out is it was really, really scary for me to start wearing trousers which were tight for the first time in there, because I had all of this messaging around purity culture, like that this was me being a sinner. And I remember I went to church one day and I wore like sheer tights and I sat in the front row because I'm a high achiever. So if I'm going to go to church, I'm going to sit in the front row. But I remember feeling like, oh my God, the pastors are looking at me. Like they're probably thinking I'm so evil and sinful. This is a church outside of Gloriavale, but I'm carrying all of this shame around my body. No one cared that I was wearing that in this church I was going to. It was just me that thought that. And then I remember wearing a bikini the first time, and I was with like my Christian friends at that time that I'd made outside of Gloriavale. Wearing a bikini for the first time, and I just felt like I was always being looked at. So it created so much shame around my body, and part of reclaiming that was reclaiming my sexual power and realizing that my sexuality and my desirability isn't a shameful thing, and that if anyone touches me and I don't invite it, that's not my fault. And so when I truly left the church, when I left Christianity, it was because I wanted to have sex. I was still a virgin, but I really wanted to try this for myself. I wanted to explore. At this point, I'd come out of Gloriavale. I'd been in church for a while. I was getting a bit tired of going to church every Sunday. And I'd met this guy and I really liked him. And I wanted to have sex with him. And so I did. And that was kind of the last thing for me where I was like, yeah, no, I'm done with this whole Christian thing. And it was really powerful to me because I was able to make that choice for myself. One, about who I was having sex with, because marriages had always been forced. Two, that I was having sex outside of marriage. That was very empowering to me because I'd always been taught you could only, and I didn't feel guilt about it because I felt that it was my choice. And so my sexuality really empowered me, and learning to be comfortable in my body and wear what I want and not be self-conscious about it was a really powerful thing for me in reclaiming my own power after living as a woman inside of a conservative Christian church and around purity culture.
Wow. That's very well said. And I guess on top of that, how about coming out? Was that part of that?
Yeah, that kind of happened very naturally. It's not actually something I've talked about much, to be honest. I didn't include it in my book at the time because there was a lot to pack in there into one book, and I'll write again. But coming out was just like I felt very naturally attracted to women. I just always had. And I was actually, when I was young, punished for it. So I received a belting from my parents for being queer. So I grew up with queer violence. And then I was able to explore that as I came out and as I made friends. And I always just tried to explore my sexuality in safe environments. And, for my sisters, that's all I would say to them, have experiences, just be safe while you're doing it. Because my parents taught me nothing about safety, nothing about consent. They're not things that you learn inside of an evangelical Christian church. So I had to learn all these things for myself, and I made mistakes, and I was taken advantage of by people. And that taught me about, if I have kids, and I do now still have siblings that I'm teaching things to and helping them through life, I'm just like, do whatever you want to do, but be safe while you're doing it. If you don't want to do something, you don't have to. And you're allowed to say no. You're allowed, if someone touches you and you're uncomfortable and you don't like it, you can walk away. How to keep themselves out of situations, how to be careful in environments where there's alcohol and substances and not being date raped and things like that. My parents grew up in Gloriavale. They had no idea how to educate me on any of this stuff. And so I had to educate myself. And I think it's a big part of why I'm so passionate about this is I want our young people to be able to keep themselves safe in the world as they're navigating things.
So growing up in that, and this kind of just being the normal, the way things are, what was the first moment you remember thinking that something was deeply wrong?
Yeah, there were a couple. One was, I'm in high school at this point. I'm sitting in my classroom. We're all quietly working away, and then a boy gets dragged through the door and placed in front of us in the classroom. So again, another public event. And this boy has disobeyed his parent. So his parent is going to teach him a lesson in front of the whole class. So the parent was Fervent Steadfast, who is one of the highest leaders in the church. He's one of the two supporting shepherds. And he makes his son bend over in front of the entire class, pulls his pants down, and proceeds to pull out a leather belt and beat the absolute ever-loving shit out of his son. So this to me is like horrific. I'm a high school girl and I cannot even like watch this. All I remember like doing once it started happening is staring down at a yellow pencil on my desk and just going, please, like, let it end, let it stop, let it end. Like, I just wanted it to be over. And so this is when I started to think, well, this person who's doing this, fervent, steadfast, who is a shepherd, he's a church leader. And I know in my heart that what is happening is wrong. I know that it's wrong. And this is where these seeds or these sprouts start to occur, where I'm like, something's not right here. This is all normal in my world, right? But something's not right here. My internal voice is telling me that something's wrong. And another event, we're at soccer and one of the boys starts arguing. I'm again in high school at this point. One of the boys starts arguing with our teacher. And our teacher is known for losing his temper. And he loses it. So he makes the boy walk from the soccer field, which was a field down below the main building, all the way up to the main building. And this entire time, he is punching, he is kicking, he is beating this young man for saying one thing. And the young man was clowning around. But this guy is using this young man as a punching bag to let out all of his anger and his emotion. And it's all accepted and it's all okay. It's okay for this type of thing to happen in this world. There's no repercussion for it. I go to my mum after and I tell her, this happened. But, the next day, this guy's back teaching us in the classroom. So this is how these events were like considered to be discipline, or that's okay for people to treat people in this way. He might have gotten maybe a slap on the wrist for being a bit too rough at the school. But these are schools. This is happening, teachers at schools. We're going to schools and seeing this type of behavior from teachers, and it's allowed and it's illegal. This is illegal. You cannot do this in New Zealand. But who's going to report it to the police? Not in a place like Gloriavale. No one has access to phones or internet unless you have a reason, and it's always incredibly controlled. You don't have cell phones. There's no radio. There's no television. You can use technology, but it's so controlled that you can only use it for certain purposes. And it's it's just very, very isolated. There's nowhere to go to ask for help.
And the fact that this is being done publicly is not only to humiliate the person, but also for all the people witnessing to be like, I don't want that to happen to me. That's that's enough for me to not want to go out, step out of line, right?
Right, like a fear tactic.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fear tactic. Again, it's a abuse of power. It's violence. Are you ever going to speak back to your teacher after you just watched that happen? I don't think so. Most wouldn't. Only those who are very brave and want to speak out. But, most people are just going to cower and go, okay, I'm not talking back. And this is how they keep control over children. But you learn very quickly, if I behave in a certain way, this is the result that I get. If I'm good, I won't get hurt. If I'm bad, I'll get hurt. And that's really that simple. So as a child trying to survive in the world, you quickly adapt yourself to survive in that world by making yourself incredibly subservient and obedient to everything around you and to the will of the church. But you are taught that it is all of your own free will. And you have free will. You're taught that you have free will. But if you follow that free will, you'll go to heaven. You'll lose your place in hell. You'll lose your place in heaven. You'll lose your family. And so, we believed in, when we say we believed in, I don't even feel like I identify with saying that. I say I was taught that there was going to be a rapture and that Jesus was going to come back to earth and take everyone who was serving him to heaven. And so I had a deep, terrifying fear as a child that I would suddenly wake up one day or just be in the middle of my day and all of my friends and families would be gone and I would be alone. Like, this was a deep phobia for me growing up as a child, because I was taught this over and over again. And I was indoctrinated with phobia to help me stay in line. And we were showing videos over and over. Every Friday night, we called them sixth night. So we didn't use Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We called them first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day. You get the picture. And on sixth day evening, we'd watch a film. My grandfather quite liked films, and we would often watch doomsday films about the end of the world. And so very young age, I'm watching incredibly terrifying films about the last days. And I'm so scared. I'm going to sleep at night having nightmares, and I'm so scared all of the time. And so it was an environment that was filled with a lot of fear.
Yeah, it's like rapture phobia is a big thing for a lot of people that grew up in that. And it makes sense. I mean, that's why wouldn't you be afraid as a child hearing that, especially every week?
Yeah.
I think I saw somewhere there's a picture of you being baptized and you look very like exuberant and excited. Was there like a point where you really liked living in this environment? And then was this the point when you started witnessing the abuse that you started seeing these cracks in your belief system?
Yeah. I've always, as I've told my story, tried to be very objective, hard because it's a personal story, but I've tried to at least paint the picture of the truth of living in Gloriavale from my perspective, my version of the truth, of how beautiful and tight-knit and close the relationships were, as well as all the nasty stuff. So because you live in hostels with all of your friends and family, the sense of connection and humans are social creatures. We need it. And it makes us feel like we belong. We have a place in society. We need belonging. And so you have so much belonging in communities like this. You have so many friends. Like, you're never even alone. There's someone around. You can go grab someone and walk to the courts and play basketball together after dinner if you have a tiny bit of spare time. Even when you're working, because the women work on like 4 rostered teams that cover all of the house chores. You're working with girls all the time. You're constantly in relationship with people, and that part's really beautiful. It's the part I miss the most about living in community like that. And it makes me very grateful today that I do have a big family, because I'm able to have a bit of that, but I still very much miss that side of things. I also grew up in one of the most beautiful locations on planet Earth. Like, New Zealand is incredible and stunning. And I grew up in a valley on a lake, mountains around me, in the wilderness. I grew up climbing trees and like literally swimming in rivers, picking rocks off riverbeds. Like, this was my life. And that I'll never not be grateful for that lifestyle. And even though my grandfather is a terrible, terrible man, and so he is still my tupuna, he is still my ancestor. And there's so many ways in which I'm grateful to him for the life that he gave us and the way that I was able to live.
Yeah, absolutely. I know growing up in these environments, there's obviously a mixture, right? It's not all bad, not all good, but obviously
never is. Yeah.
The one thing outweighs it, obviously, is, but do you feel like witnessing this abuse that you were seeing, was that the beginning of the cracks in the system for you?
Yeah, it was the biggest one. Because I also watched this happen to my siblings. My mother was what we called the house mother there. And so she was always very, very busy. That's the highest position that a woman can hold. It basically means she is the head of all of the women and manages the entire situation for the housing. And when I say housing, I'm talking food, clothing, and everything else that are female roles. My father was also he was part of the circle, one of the servants. So he was ran one of the businesses. So Gloriavale had a business, like a sphagnum moss business. You basically pick moss out of the swamps on the west coast, and then you export it overseas, and it gets used in very hot, dry places in plants for planting and for gardening, and it absorbs like up to 200 times its own moisture or something like that. Don't quote me. But he was head of one of the businesses, and so they're both very busy. But because there's no birth control, and abortion is a sin, it means that, and because people get married very young, it means I have a lot of siblings, right? So from a very young age, I just remember raising my siblings. I burped them and I watched them come out my mother's womb. I watched my first baby being born when I was 10. We had all home births. So I watched my first baby born at 10. I changed their dirty nappies, settled them down in the middle of the night, and basically like raised them in every way that you could possibly, like if you described to me what it's like to raise your son today, I would tick each of those boxes for having parented my young siblings. And so I'm watching them. I'm watching things happen to them in the preschools. I'm watching like preschool ladies take wooden bats and like hit my very, very, very young, and like not like to my knee young children. And I'm just, everything in my whole body is telling me this is wrong. And that's got to be the biggest thing that for me was like, this place is fucked. Like, this is wrong. I cannot stay here and be here. But I'm so indoctrinated into this place that I deeply, deeply believe it's a sin to leave. I can't leave, because if I leave, I'm going to go to hell. And the world is evil. And this is the God's true church. This is the one true church of God. There's nowhere else in the world that I can go to be a Christian. Only in Gloriavale can I serve God and remain a Christian. The world outside is evil. And I haven't visited the world outside. So this is what I've been told. I have no other way to fact check any of that information. So what happens is my two older siblings can't take it anymore and decide to run away from home. I'm very young at this point. I'm like, I think I was 12 when my first sibling ran away and 14 when the next did. And it's like, if you want to get out of Gloriavale and you're a 15-year-old, you like basically plan it to know when no one's around. You might take a pack on your back. If not, it'll be the clothes on your back. And you have to trek, like Gloriavale is very far away from a lot of civilization. And you have to trek across paddocks and run away in the middle of the night. You have to get across the bridge. There's only one bridge leading into the property. And then you have to find someone on the outside to help you and to take you somewhere where you can get some support. It is incredibly hard. And children were running away because this place was horrible. So my siblings leave, and I experience grief for the first time in my life. But I don't know what that is. I don't know what grief is. I've experienced this feeling of deep, deep low. I know that I just feel so low. And I have no words to wrap around that feeling. I just know that something's wrong. But I have to grin and bear it. I have to go to work. When I say work, I have to go fulfill my role in the community the next day. Then 4 years later, my next younger sibling, who I'm very close with, Victor, he decides he's going to leave too. And I'm so close with him, I'm like, this can't be happening again, because he tells my parents that he's going to do it. So he doesn't just run off in the middle of the night. For some reason, he communicates about it. So my parents at the time think we will not lose another one of our children. If there is, if God wanted our family to always be split and to be constantly torn apart, then something's wrong. They didn't believe that the God they believed in would want this for their family. And my dad's in contact with my toa, which is my grandmother. And, I think she's helping him come to some of these beliefs as well, like God doesn't want this for your family. And she comes back to live with us in Gloriavale. She had left that church for many, many years. She comes back to live. And she came back with the intention she wanted to bring us out. We didn't know that at the time. We thought she'd just come back to God and that she'd been saved again. And so my parents go to the leadership and they say, we don't believe God wants this. We want to ask you for a concession. And that would be that we can live on the outside in a home part-time with our family who have left so that we can keep our family together. But ultimately the goal is that we will bring them all back to Gloriavale. So the leadership grants this. My dad's in a position of power. My mother is in a position of power with the women. So they're respected. And my grandfather says, okay. And so what starts to happen is now I start to live on the outside of Gloriavale. And for the very first time in my life, I start to experience these things which we called worldly. We always called them worldly things. Things like different music, like Shania Twain, just like blew my mind. And that kind of started that whole snowball of me, trying different things.
How about your friend was ordered into a marriage that she didn't choose, and that was a turning point. Could you tell that story for us real quick?
Yeah. So another thing that really impacted my decision, I think it was the last straw, because we've been living for 18 months. We'd been living in this, I call it the halfway house. And I was living in a house with my family privately over in Lake Brunner, Moana, about 40 minutes away from Gloriavale. And then every day we were going back to Gloriavale, and then I'd put my headscarf on at the gate again and make sure I was wearing all the right clothes, and then would go to our normal job there. And then I'm talking to I'm going to young people's meetings as well. So I was really torn because I wanted to stay involved with all of the youth group activities, but I couldn't do that if I was going back to the house with my family. So on the weekends, I was actually staying back in Gloriavale the whole time so I could still participate in the youth activities because they were really fun. And it was like we'd play soccer or something, and then we'd have a big youth sermon, and it was like my social life, right? So my mother comes to me, she tells me, hey, she sort of didn't say explicitly we're leaving, but we were having a conversation about it. And I said, well, if you leave, I'm not coming with you, which really cut her up. I didn't feel like I could leave, but I was feeling quite relieved that all my other family were leaving, but I didn't feel like I could at the time. I'd made my commitment vow to the church. And when you take your vow, it's supposed to be a lifelong commitment. So I would have to break my vow to leave. And then what happens is my best friend in the world comes to me one day and she's like, they're sending me to India. They're forcing me to marry an Indian man, because Gloriavale had started some outreach programs to India and we're establishing a church there. And she is distraught. She's like, I can't do this. I can't marry this man. She just like was being forced into this marriage. And I looked at her and I was like, I just knew that this shouldn't be happening. And I said to her, well, then you have to leave. So I was committing this sin of telling my best friend that she has to leave because she was experiencing this. And in that moment, I kind of thought, well, if I can tell her to leave, I'm allowed to leave too. And the only person's permission that I'd been waiting for, because I had my parents' permission to leave, was my own. And in that moment when I gave her permission to leave and I supported her in that decision, that was the last straw for me. And I went to my parents very shortly after and said, I will leave with you.
Wow. So she was the reason that you left. She was the spark.
Yeah. She was a bit of a wild child too. So I think she was a bit of a bad influence. She wasn't raised in Gloriavale like I was. She joined very young, but she had actually grown up in the outside world, moved around a lot of Mennonite communities, lived in a lot of intentional communities. Her parents had adopted her. So she would tell me stories about wearing leather jackets, which was really I was like, what, a leather jacket? And wearing pants, like she'd worn pants before, and pants is a big no-no. If you're not allowed to wear pants in Gloriavale for women. So she was telling me all these stories too. So I think she was influencing me a little bit along the way too, kind of opening my mind to a life that might look a little bit different than what I'd been living.
But it seemed like what changed it or flipped the script for you was hearing your own words back at you. The what you were telling your friend, you realized that you could then do it yourself. Is that kind of how it happened?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I realized that how can I, like, if I'm looking at someone that I love and I'm telling them that they should make the best decision for them, then I have to look at myself and give myself that same grace, give myself that same support. Because I was like, either I believe people can leave or I believe they can't. So if I believe she can leave, then, well, now I must believe that people can leave.
But I guess with that, did you still have that fear indoctrination? Was that still in your mind, even though you'd made that part of the decision?
Yeah. I was 18 at this point. You don't leave that place without severe PTSD. No one I know has come out of Gloriavale unscathed. This is a place that is very warped and very twisted and hurts people very badly. So I came out with my family, and I first started going to churches. There's a church in Christchurch called Grace Vineyard. It's one of the vineyard churches.
Yeah.
I started going there, and it felt like it was a safe enough step for me to go, okay, I'm not just going to say, well, now I'm not a Christian, but I'm going to go to church. I'm going to keep my faith. But I'm going to dress like a worldly woman now. I'm going to wear pants. I'm not going to wear a head covering. And I'm 18, so I'm still young enough to be impressionable and to be influenced. My mother struggled with removing the head covering for quite a time. I didn't find it so hard. And I do think it was the age. It could have been personality, but when you've been in a place like Gloriavale for such a long, long period of time, I think it takes more time to deconstruct that as well. But I found it quite easy to just take the headscarf off. I felt naked for a time with doing that, but then, slowly I got used to it. And so I was having all of these experiences. They were scary, but they were also exciting. I was doing all these things that I'd never been allowed to do. So I'm going to church and I'm meeting a lot of friends and I'm making new friends. And this is all really helpful for me as a young woman who has literally just lost her entire society, her and all of her friend group. I started making friends in church, and this was I would call it a healthy environment. And there was a lot of diversity in the church as well, compared to what I'd been raised with. There were a lot of different ways of thinking, and I was slowly exposed more and more to different ideas. I didn't stay in that church for a long period of time, but I stayed there for at least a few years and made some really great friends there, and that was a nice transition for me.
And then after you left, you became interested in human behavior. What kind of control tactics did you later recognize from all that?
There's a lot there.
It's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question because literally if you describe any abusive relationship, it's going to have all of the same. Any high control abusive relationship will have all of the same traits as Gloriavale. Isolate you from other people, control every single aspect of your life, control you financially, control what you can wear, control what you can eat, what you can read or watch, so just high control. So you have no choice, you have no autonomy, you have no freedom. And then there's the physical violence aspect of it as well. Not all abusive relationships have a physical aspect. Gloriavale did, though. So those were some of the things that I started to see. The way that you're gaslit as well. You don't quite know if what you're seeing or thinking is true, because you're always told the opposite. So it's a very, very confusing environment to navigate, especially as a young person.
I'm just curious too, though. Is your grandfather still alive, or is he still around?
He died about, I think it might be about 4 years ago. Yeah. But Gloriavale's still there.
It's still there. It's still operating.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still operating. So there's a lot of work being done by leavers to right the wrongs and to essentially, like, we're calling for change. And that comes through the stories we're telling. Child welfare services, Oranga Tamariki here in New Zealand, have been now going into the community to start to try to make the environment more safe for children. There are so many children who come out of Gloriavale who have been sexually abused. Like, it would be very rare to find someone who had not been.
Yeah, and I was curious too. Were they upset when you started speaking out, like with your TED Talk, which was amazing? Did you hear from them at all?
I heard from a few of them, but mostly they just left me alone. Like, they kind of just believe it's persecution, and they used to call my mother a witch, and that was just because she left too, not because she did anything particular. She just left, so suddenly she was a witch. But I've also been very careful about how much I interact with people from Gloriavale too. Like, I interact with people and I talk to people that I know are safe people, but I'm just really, really careful. There hasn't been too much repercussion with me speaking out. It was actually more difficult for my family who had left with me when I spoke out. That's actually the more hard thing to navigate, because I spoke out, I told my story. This is a very personal story, right? But it involves my family. It's not my family's story, because their versions of it are totally different from mine. You know, you and I could experience the same event. I'm going to tell one story about it and you'll tell another. They're not the same story, and both of those stories belong respectively to each of us. But it's hard. It is hard for family members to have their lives basically exposed on a global stage. And I understood that, and I knew I needed to approach it really respectfully. Now, with some family members, it didn't go down well, and I had to cut contact with those family members. I have no contact with family members who treated me like rubbish during that period. But it was, what I'm really grateful for is it also showed me who people really are. And it made me go, okay, well, I'm actually going to stand in my power and my strength. We call it mana, we call it personal power in Te Reo Māori, which is my culture. And I'm going to speak. And those who don't want me to speak and who won't support me to speak and who are in fact attacking me to speak, well, then at least I can see that is what their position is, and I can distance and have boundaries with those people and remove them from my life if need be. And in my culture, we also say tihe Māori ora, which means I call to claim the right to speak. And I believe that I have a right to speak, and I have a right to tell my story, regardless of how it impacts my family. Now, I don't say that lightly, because I love my family very dearly, and they're very, very important to me. But I am also willing to give up relationships that cannot respect me and cannot respect my rights.
Good for you. I have a lot of respect for that and completely understand where you're coming from.
Having boundaries like that, clear boundaries are very important for your own mental well-being, if nothing else,
When you have no boundaries growing up in a place like Gloriavale, like, the whole idea is that you have no boundaries. People are allowed to do whatever they want to you. And so learning boundaries was really the biggest thing for me, years and years of therapy in and out of romantic relationships. And what I'm really grateful to of having gone through relationships and breakups is learning what I will and won't tolerate, learning about myself and defining those boundaries for myself. And honestly, it's the biggest gift you can give to your child is to teach them how to make boundaries for themselves, and also boundaries with my parents. My parents didn't have boundaries either. And as an adult, I had to set boundaries with my parents. And that was really hard, because I was redefining the terms of our relationship. we've had this agreement up until a certain point in my life that this is how things are going to be. And suddenly I'm saying, this is not how things are going to be anymore. The contract, which we didn't sign, but, is unspoken between us, this is not how things are going to be anymore. And that's really hard. Everything about your relationship is shifting. And that's hard for both parties. It's hard for you, but it's hard for the other person too.
Yeah, it's hard to learn to say no when you've just said yes or gone along your whole life. To be like, nope, I'm not going to do that without feeling guilty or remorse or like you've done something wrong, right?
Yeah, and it's also the reactions of people, right? So like when you say no, people get nasty. They start threatening you. And like there was a lot of behavior that was very similar to like Gloriavale. And I remember with one parent, I, stood my boundaries and I was threatened that I would not see my sister. And honestly, I lost my shit. And I was like, you cannot stop me from seeing my sister. I have a right to. But this is what they've been taught to be like. If you don't obey me, and they're used to having their children obey them. This is the world they have lived in. My children obey me on everything. And now I've got my children suddenly not obeying me on things. And oh my God, I can't control my children. What do I do now? I start threatening my children. So my parents had to learn how to properly treat their children as well. And that was hard too. And I had to teach my parents how to treat me. You can treat me like this. I will not tolerate you treating me this other way.
Not to mention, it's people like you that is breaking the cycle by speaking out. If we don't speak out about these things, it's never going to change. And so that's the whole point of all this is to break that cycle and change. And it's always tough because when you're the person that's breaking it, you're the one that's shaking it all up. Then people start acting out towards you.
Yeah.
And what I said before, when we spoke before, I mentioned how most people are. They choose a religion based on where they're born or what the religion their parents are, but like a lot of them are just born into it.
Yeah.
Like in your situation, you're just indoctrinated from birth, right? So like just making the decision to not do the same for your own kids. The same thing. It's ending that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like, I don't really believe that there are Christian children. There's just children of Christian parents. Because children cannot decide at that age what they believe. I didn't really decide what I believed and still don't know exactly what I believe today because it's just an evolving journey belief. But I find it my family today still practice baptism, child baptism. And I really disagree with that practice because children cannot decide. I know it feels natural and it felt natural to me too. Like I was in Gloriavale, so it was very natural for me to be baptized at 10. And I thought it was my choice too. But did I really have a choice? It was just the society I was raised in. If there's no alternative, is there a choice? There was only one choice in front of me, which was you live in the way instructed by our family, by our society, by our community and our church, or you leave.
So for you, after this period of time, and I guess to now, really, what was that process like of, did you deconstruct the religion or just the cult aspects of it? Because I know that the cult stuff is what pushed you away from it, but then what was that like after that?
Yeah, the cult stuff did push me away from it partly, but I always like people to look at the full picture when it comes to my story. I didn't only leave Christianity because of the harm. I left it because I just didn't fucking believe it. Like when I came out and looked at things and educated myself, I started reading. I started exploring other religions. I had access to information now. I had free access to the internet. I could look at other options. And suddenly, a lot of the things that during my childhood hadn't made sense to me now made sense to me. And the reason was because I just didn't believe them. And I was being force-fed the doctrines of the world that I lived in. And so I was actually able to go, oh, well, actually, I just don't believe this. So I'm not going to follow it, not because this particular belief gave me harm, but because it makes no sense at all to my intelligent thinking, logical brain. And so that was a big reason why I eventually left Christianity for good. There were these certain things that, like certain moments that helped me to leave, but ultimately deconstructing was simply a matter of education. And I always feel that I was always not going to be a Christian because I don't think I was a Christian from the start. I was just born into a Christian family. And so deconstructing was actually about coming back to myself. And now it's about, for me, exploring my Indigenous roots and the Indigenous beliefs and how we interact with the world and how we respect the world around us. Māori have a very different worldview. We don't have a vertical, like there's a God up there and we pray to him. And there were also the other like aspects of Christianity that I deconstructed, like, why is God a man?
Yeah.
Like, why is God a man? And why is Jesus white? Historically speaking, like all the pictures of Jesus that I'm seeing, most places, Jesus is white. Jesus, if he existed in the culture that we believe, would not have been white. So how does that make sense? And also, like, I've got people saying that they're speaking in tongues, which is just mental to me. Like, that's just crazy people stuff. Like, so I was, all these things that never made sense to me was just like, I could let go of them because I don't think I ever truly believed them in the first place. I remember they used to say, oh, you have to be filled with the Spirit, right? And I was in meetings on my hands and knees. I was in church meetings on my hands and knees. Please let me be filled with the Spirit. Nothing. Nada. Couldn't feel anything. So something must have been wrong with me. And then when I came out into the wide world and looked, actually started reading and thinking, I was like, oh, well, no wonder nothing happened because I don't believe in this. There's like this Holy Spirit thing is not real to me. And so then suddenly my experiences growing up actually made a lot more sense to me. I didn't like a lot of the toxic practices, and I did ultimately too leave Christianity because of a morality issue. Like, I couldn't stand a religion and a faith that was like teaching, oh, love everyone but hate the gays. Love everyone, but if you don't obey us, we're going to send you to hell for eternal punishment. And then I was looking at this character in the Bible, God, and I was going, this is just like the most abusive, nasty character who is a horrible villain. Like, literally, Sodom and Gomorrah, this God is like, these people are not doing what I like. I'm going to just kill the whole city. Like, imagine that on the news in today's world. God suddenly decides that Los Angeles is a city full of sinners. And then decides, okay, if you're good and you serve me, I'll give you 1 day to get out. And if you aren't out by the end of the day, everyone's dead. Would we really follow that God? For most Christians, like if there are believers listening to this, would you really follow that God? Because that is the God that you are following if you believe in the Bible. And none of that made sense to me. So I walked away from my faith and have never looked back.
Where do you sit with all this now, and with your family, with all of this? Obviously, this story, you've written a book, obviously, about it, and you are you still processing it all? Like, yeah, just where do you sit now?
Today, I'm like really clear on my values and what is important to me, and I live my life according to my internal compass of what is right and wrong. And I had these experiences growing up where I saw things in the world around me and I was like, that's right, that's wrong. And now I just try and tune into that to guide me through the world. And I've also reclaimed, like in psychology, there's this thing called the locus of control, which is basically means you either have a center of control here inside of your body, or you have one outside of your body that you look to for power. I believe my power comes from my body. And for anyone who's listening to the podcast, I'm touching my body and I'm just pointing to my stomach. This is where my power comes from. And I don't need to look outside of me for power or guidance. And that inner trust that I have built is what guides me through today. I identify atheist because I read the book The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Amazing book. Really broke it down for me. I'd been taught atheism was like this evil thing. All the atheists were just out to like get all the Christians. That narrative is used a lot in conservative Christianity to create it's us versus them. And it's like very segregating, and it creates a massive barrier of separation. So for me, it was about looking at, like, when I looked at atheism, it just made so much sense to me. And I was like, I just wanted something or a label that could make sense to me. At the end of my book, I actually call myself agnostic, and it's been a little bit of a journey. And again, I might change that. Who knows? This is the thing. Like, now I'm not inside of a strict, structured religion. I'm adaptable, and I'm allowed to grow, and I'm allowed to change. So that's where I sit with things today. I'm more deeply reconnecting with my Māori heritage as well, relearning the language and what that means. Because Christianity, and I'm in a Māori family, but Christianity wasn't what we originally believed and what our people believed. It was brought over by the colonists into New Zealand. And so for me, in Māori, we believe that we interact with the world in an expansive way, outwards from us and inwards to us, not in a vertical way that we look up to something and they look down to us. So the gods in Māori are like, you go into the moana, the ocean, you are interacting with the god of the ocean by being in the ocean. When you interact with the bush, you are interacting with Tāne. There's not like a god of the bush. There is just the bush. And so there's this beautiful relationship between us and the natural world. And that very much is what feels good to me today. And I'm exploring that even more and trying to understand what that means to me, what being Māori looks like to me. I'll get my moko. So in Māori, we get moko, which are tattoos, often on our faces and on our bodies. And these are the stories of our lives. And that is how storytelling was passed down through the generations, by tattooing it on our bodies. And I'll get that. Didn't think I was ever going to get that growing up. Tattoos were evil, they were wicked, they were a sin, piercings, earrings, makeup, the whole lot of it. You were Jezebel. So I'm basically the walking version of Jezebel, and I feel my life's purpose is to make my grandfather roll over in his grave.
I love that. With all that said, how do you take that all into the practices that you engage with now? Like, you're a brand coach, I believe, as well?
Yeah. So I had this experience of coming out of a very dark place, very hard history, and I wanted to do something with that. First, I wanted to give myself a voice, but it was very, very important to me that I was able to help give others a voice too and empower them. I am someone who has a deep sense of responsibility to help others with my experiences. And so that evolved into me ultimately creating a business where I help people to tell their stories and to grow a powerful personal brand doing that. Because I'm a best-selling author, I've spoken on the TEDx stage, I have a lot of experience public speaking, and I have a background in web design and development as well. And I've worked with people to help them grow their businesses. So my work today is all based around story, and it's what my deepest passion is, because I've been through this experience. But I also know that when you keep your story trapped in your body, your shame is still trapped in your body as well, and you can never truly be free. And there was a very much I remember I told my story, and I was traveling at the time to promote my book. And I remember standing in a hotel room overlooking Auckland City, and I was like, I can die in peace now because my story is no longer trapped inside of me. And when we tell our stories, and you only even have to tell your story once, it touches millions and millions of lives. And when I die, I know that my book is still going to be there for people to read. My book is now a part of New Zealand's history. And there will still be people who watch my TED Talks or read my books or listen to this podcast interview long after I'm gone. And so that was really important to me, to be able to show people how to do that, because it's very hard to do alone. And it's also can be re-traumatizing and very triggering to go through that process alone. I did it at the time, and I didn't have a lot of family support, but there were a few people that I really leaned on when I was telling my story, because I was still really young. I was only in my 20s. And so now I'm like, okay, this means I need to create a place that people can come to be able to do this for themselves. So that's the work that I'm doing today, is providing a space where people can work with me for a period of time to grow their brand using their story.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Great work. I love that, because I've always used art as a way to exercise it from yourself. And it always feels so healing. And like you said, if it's touching other people, then it's something that lives on and can keep helping people, and that lives outside of yourself, which is, I think, one of the greatest things you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me or wants to read my book is Daughter of Gloriavale, My Life in a Religious Cult. It's available on Amazon. And I'm on Instagram, Lilia Tarawa. I'm Lilia Tarawa on almost all social media platforms, so you can find me there.
Yeah, it's such a cool story. Your story is such a story of hope, for people that are trapped in maybe not the exact same situations, but, you're somebody who's now has become successful, and you're healthy and you're happy, and you seem like you're living your best life from what I can tell. So that's really powerful, and it's inspirational for people. So that's great.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, and it's a never ending journey deconstructing. Like, it's never going to stop for me. I'm also really grateful. Like, I'm deeply, deeply grateful for my experiences, because they made me into this person, and I love who I am, and I wouldn't be who I am without having these experiences of growing up in a cult and experiencing abuse and witnessing abuse. And so, I think that's just one little piece that's really important if you are someone who is healing, is to be able to look back at your experiences and know that you can turn them into your greatest strength and your greatest power. They don't have to be something that controls your life. You can be free of them, and you can live a full and happy life regardless of what you've been through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
Being a survivor.
Yeah. Oh, I remember the first time I ever stood on stage. I was at an event in a women's breakfast. And I stood on stage, and for the very first time in my life, I said, I am an abuse survivor. And then I broke down into tears. And I'd never said that out loud to anyone. I didn't even know. I didn't even know I was an abuse survivor. And I don't even remember writing it into my talk. But I literally think that my body and my creativity was just bringing that out so I could truly name my experiences for what they have been. And that was really powerful to me. I know people, like family members today, who still don't want to call Gloriavale a cult, because it was just, they don't like labeling it as that. And I'm like, it's just a word. The word cult isn't going to hurt Gloriavale. Gloriavale's hurting people.
Yes, yes.
But there's this you don't even know sometimes. And as you unpack it, and you're like, whoa, now I have language for it.
Lilia, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story so openly with us.
Yeah, we just appreciate your honesty and courage. This is exactly why we do Exodus Brothers, to have real conversations about questioning, leaving, and rebuilding. Don't forget to follow and review the show. It helps a lot. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Kia ora, rawa atu. Thank you very much for having me, and haere rā, goodbye.